The warning beacons had been screaming into the void for 3,000 years. Every ship that came within range of the Sol system received the same message in 400 different languages. Forbidden's world. Do not approach. Contamination. Zone. Death awaits all who enter. Ambassador Valith of the Sithrani. Dominion had seen these warnings on her navigation screens 1,000 times during her career. She had always ignored them the way every spacefaring creature ignored them. Earth was a dead world. Everyone knew that the humans had destroyed themselves in nuclear fire and biological warfare, long before the Galactic Concord had even finished mapping this region of space. That was what the official records said. That was what every child in the Concord learned in their first year of education. The mad primates of the third planet had been too violent and too stupid to survive their own technology. They had burned their world and died screaming in the ashes. The gravitic barrier around the Sol system was merely a precaution against contamination. Nothing more. Valith stood on the observation deck of her diplomatic vessel, the Serene Judgment, and watched the stars drift past. She was returning from a trade negotiation with the Morvik Collective, and her route took her past the edge of the Forbidden Zone. She had made this journey dozens of times before, but something felt different tonight. Her scales prickled with an unease she could not name. Ambassador, her Tiff called from the doorway. You should come to the bridge immediately. The urgency in his voice made her move faster than dignity usually allowed. When she reached the bridge, the entire crew stood frozen at their stations. They were all staring at the main view screen. The gravitic barrier that had surrounded the Sol system for 3 millennia was flickering. Valith watched in horror as sections of the barrier sputtered and died like candles in a wind. Ancient technology that had held strong for longer than most civilizations existed was failing. How is this possible? She whispered. We do not know, Ambassador, her captain replied. But that is not the worst of it. He gestured to the communications officer, who pressed a sequence of buttons with trembling fingers. A sound filled the bridge. It was a transmission coming from inside the quarantine zone. At first, Valith thought it was static or interference. Then she realized it was a language. It was a language that no living creature had spoken in 3,000 years. Can you translate it? She demanded. The communications officer nodded slowly. It is in the old human tongue, Ambassador, the one called English. What does it say? The officer swallowed hard and met her eyes. It says, we are coming home. Valith felt the blood drain from her face. That is impossible. The humans are dead. They killed themselves. The records are clear. The records may not tell the whole truth, Ambassador. She turned to find her ship's historian standing behind her. Old Methris had served on diplomatic vessels for longer than Valith had been alive. His gray scales were dull with age, but his eyes remained sharp. What do you mean? She asked. Methris moved to a console and began pulling up files that Valith had never seen before. I have spent many years studying the archives. There are gaps in the official history. Inconsistencies that do not make sense. Speak plainly, Old One. The humans did not destroy themselves, Ambassador. They were destroyed, or at least that was the intention. Valith felt the deck shift beneath her feet, though she knew the ship had not moved. You are speaking treason. I am speaking truth. The Concord did not place that barrier to keep contamination inside. They placed it to keep the humans inside, to make sure none of them ever escaped. A new alarm began blaring throughout the ship. Ambassador, the captain shouted. Multiple contacts emerging from the quarantine zone. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. The view screen shifted to show the space near. Earth ships were pouring through the gaps in the failing barrier. They were ships of designs that no Concord database recognized. They were huge and sleek and moved with a precision that spoke of technology far beyond anything the Concord possessed. Send a message to Concord High Command, Valith ordered. Tell them. She stopped. What could she possibly tell them that the species they had tried to exterminate 3,000 years ago had returned, that humanity was not dead, that every lie the Concord had told its citizens was about to be exposed? Tell them the humans are back, she finally said. Tell them to prepare for war. The communications officer sent the message, but even as he did, Valith knew it would not matter. She had seen the size of that fleet. She had seen the way those ships moved, whatever humanity had been doing for the past 3,000 years. It had not been dying. It had been preparing. The largest ship in the formation moved to the front of the fleet. It was a vessel so massive that it dwarfed even the Concord's greatest dreadnoughts. Lights along its hull spelled out words in a language that Valith could not read, but her translator could. What does it say? She asked. The communications officer's voice was barely a whisper. It says Prometheus, and beneath it says, "We remember everything." Valith closed her eyes. The Concord had spent 3,000 years telling itself that the human problem had been solved. They had congratulated themselves on their wisdom and mercy. They had built an empire on the ashes of a species they believed they had destroyed, and now that a species had returned, not as refugees or survivors, but as something far more terrifying. They had returned as conquerors, and they remembered everything that had been done to them. The barrier finally collapsed completely. The warning beacons went silent for the first time in 3 millennia, and the fleet began to move. Earth was forbidden no longer. The humans had come home, and the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord began in chaos and only grew worse from there. 12 species sent their representatives to the Great Chamber on station. Prime 40 delegates screamed at each other in a dozen different languages. Accusations flew like weapons. The Sethrani blamed the Morvic for letting the barrier fail. The Morvic blamed the crystalline hegemony for not monitoring the quarantine zone. The hegemony blamed everyone else for not taking the human threat seriously. Enough. High Chancellor Morinth watched the chaos from his elevated platform and felt something he had not experienced in over 200 years of political life. Fear. True absolute fear. He finally raised his hand and activated the silence protocol. Every voice in the chamber was cut off at once. The delegates stood with their mouths open, unable to make any sound. "You will listen," Morinth said into the sudden quiet, "and you will learn the truth, a truth that has been hidden from most of you for 3,000 years. He gestured, and the chamber's holographic display came to life. Images appeared in the air, images of Earth as it had been before the quarantine. Blue oceans and green continents, cities that sparkled with light ships, rising from the surface into orbit. This is what humanity built in less than 10,000 years of civilization," Morinth said. "They went from stone tools to starships faster than any species in recorded history." The images changed. Now they showed human colony worlds, 17 of them scattered across a region of space that bordered Concord territory. In less than a century, after achieving faster than light travel, the humans had spread to 17 worlds. They had a population of over 30 billion. They had reverse-engineered our technology and improved upon it. Murmurs began to spread through the chamber, despite the silence protocol. Some delegates had clearly not known any of this, but that was not what made them dangerous. Morinth continued. New images appeared. They showed humans meeting with other species, species that the Concord had conquered and subjugated long ago. The humans made alliances. They offered freedom and equality to species we had spent millennia keeping under our control. They were building a coalition that would have challenged everything we had created. Ambassador Valith stepped forward. "High Chancellor, are you saying that the Concord? I am saying that our ancestors faced a choice," Morinth replied. "They could share power with a species that had existed for the blink of an eye, or they could eliminate the threat." He paused. They chose a third option. The images changed again. Now they showed Concord warships in orbit around Earth. Weapons fired, cities burned, billions died in the span of hours. We did not wait for the humans to destroy themselves. Morinth said. We destroyed them. Orbital bombardment followed by a biological weapon designed to sterilize. The survivors, we called it the Mercy Protocol. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in horror and disbelief. Some called Morinth a liar. Others demanded to see proof. The High Chancellor waited for silence to return. The official history was created to hide our shame. We told ourselves and our children that the humans had killed themselves, that they were too violent and primitive to survive. We made them into monsters, so we would not have to admit that we were the monsters. Young delegate from the Vreen Confederacy raised his hand. If we destroyed them, then how are they here now? How did they survive? Morinth pulled up the final file in the archive. This is the last entry in the classified records. It was recorded. 300 years after the Mercy Protocol, a sensor reading appeared on the display. It showed a single ship rising from Earth's surface. A ship that should not have existed. A ship that slipped through the barrier and vanished into uncharted space. Some of them survived, Morinth said. We do not know how many. We do not know how they hid from our sensors, but they escaped, and they have been out there somewhere beyond our borders for nearly 3,000 years. Doing what, Valith? Asked Morinth, looked at her with ancient, tired eyes. Rebuilding, growing, preparing. And now they have returned with a fleet larger than anything we have ever seen. What do they want? What would you want, Ambassador? If someone had murdered your entire species, if they had burned your homeworld and sterilized your survivors, if they had spent 3,000 years telling lies about you while you rebuilt everything from nothing. Valith did not answer. She did not need to. Everyone in the chamber knew what humanity wanted. They wanted revenge. They wanted justice. They wanted the Concord to pay for what it had done. And looking at the size of the fleet on the display, Valith realized something terrible they were going to get. We must prepare our defenses, one of the Morvic delegates shouted. We must gather our fleets and meet them in battle. With what? Morinth asked. Their technology is 3,000 years ahead of ours. They have had all that time to develop. Without our interference, while we grew comfortable and lazy, we cannot defeat them in open warfare. Then, what do we do? Morinth sat back in his chair. For the first time since the session began, he looked truly old. We pray, he said. We pray that they are better than we were. We pray that they did not inherit our capacity for cruelty. Because if they did, then everything we have built is about to burn. The chamber fell silent. Outside the viewports, the stars continued to shine, but somewhere in that darkness, a fleet was moving, and it carried the hopes and rage of a species that had been left for dead 3,000 years ago. The humans were coming, and they remembered everything. Captain Alara Vance had been born on a world that should not exist. New Horizon was a planet hidden in a region of space so far from Concord territory that no sensor had ever reached it. It was there that humanity had rebuilt itself from the ashes of genocide. Alara stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and looked at the faces of her crew. They were humans like her, but they were also something more. They were the children of survivors. They carried the memory of what had been done to their ancestors in their very bones. Captain, her tactical officer, called out. All ships report ready. The fleet is in formation. Alara nodded and turned to face the main view screen. Behind her ship stretched an armada that would have been unthinkable to her ancestors. 1,200 vessels of every size and configuration, dreadnoughts that could crack planets, carriers that housed thousands of fighters, cruisers and destroyers and corvettes, all built with technology that made Concord ships look like children's toys. But the fleet's greatest strength was not its weapons. It was its crew. Open a channel to all ships. Alara commanded. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, Captain. Alara took a breath and began to speak. 3,000 Years ago, the Galactic Concord tried to murder our species. They burned our cities and poisoned our people. They thought they had succeeded. They were wrong. She paused and let the words sink in. Our ancestors fled into the unknown. They found a world where they could rebuild, and they made a promise. A promise that one day their children would return home. Around her, the bridge crew stood straighter. Pride burned in their eyes. But we did not rebuild alone. When we fled, we found others who had suffered under the Concord. Species that had been enslaved and exploited and forgotten. We offered them shelter. We offered them freedom. We offered them a place in our family. The view screen shifted to show the other ships in the fleet. Many of them were crewed by beings who were not human at all. The Valkyrie, with their 4 arms and purple skin, had been slaves to the Sethrani for 10,000 years. Humans had freed them 5 centuries ago. Now they served as humanity's closest allies. The Druin were beings of living crystal that the Concord had classified as non-sentient. They had been mined for their bodies and used as decoration. Humans had recognized them as people and given them sanctuary. 17 species in total made up the fleet. All of them refugees from Concord oppression. All of them eager to see the old order fall. Today we go home, Alara continued. But we do not go to conquer. We do not go to destroy. We go to reclaim what was taken from us. We go to show the galaxy that humanity could not be broken. She raised her fist. We survived. The crew echoed her words. We survived. We remembered. We remembered. And now we return. The channel closed and Alara turned to her. Navigation officer. Set course for Sol System. Maximum speed. Course set, Captain. All ships engage. The fleet moved as one star as blurred as the vessels entered slipspace. They were using technology that the Concord did not even know existed. 3,000 years of development without interference had produced wonders. Beyond anything the elder races had imagined, Alara had studied the history of her people extensively. She knew how close humanity had come to extinction. The survivors who had fled Earth numbered less than 10,000. They had been cramped into a handful of ships with limited supplies and no destination. Many had wanted to give up. Many had wanted to die. But a woman named Sarah Chun had refused to let humanity. And she had led the survivors through the void for decades until they found New Horizon. She had organized the rebuilding effort. She had established the principles that would guide humanity for millennia. We will not become what destroyed us. She had written, we will be better. We will build a society based on freedom and equality and justice. And one day, we will return to Earth, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Alara carried those words in her heart. Admiral Chun stood beside her on the bridge. He was old now, but his eyes still burned with purpose. He was a direct descendant of Sarah Chun herself. My grandmother spoke of this day, he said quietly. She told my mother that the return would come within 10 generations. She was almost right. We are late by a few centuries, Alara replied. Better late than never, Captain. The slipspace tunnel opened and the fleet emerged into normal space. Before them hung a system that every human had dreamed of their entire life. Sol, the sun that had warmed Earth for billions of years, shone golden against the darkness. And there in the distance orbited a small blue world. Earth-home Alara felt tears forming in her eyes. She had been born light years away from this place. She had never seen Earth except in pictures and videos, but something in her recognized it. Something in her blood knew that this was where her species had begun. Captain, the tactical officer reported. The barrier is still partially active, but it is failing rapidly. Let it fall. We have waited long enough. The fleet moved forward. The ancient barrier flickered and died around them. Warning beacons that had screamed for 3,000 years finally went silent, and for the first time since the Mercy Protocol, the children of Earth entered their home system. Welcome home, Admiral Chun whispered. Alara nodded. They were home at last, but there was still work to be done. The Concorde had positioned a defensive fleet at the edge of the system, 300 ships ready to destroy any human vessel that approached. They thought they were facing refugees and survivors. They thought they were facing an easy victory. They were wrong. All ships prepare for battle, Ilar commanded. The fleet spread into attack formation, weapons powered up, shields activated, and humanity prepared to take back what was theirs. Admiral Kreveth of the Sethrani war fleet had commanded ships for over a century. He had fought in 17 major engagements. He had never lost a battle. But as he watched the human fleet emerge from slipspace, he felt something cold settle in. His stomach fear. How many ships? He demanded. Over 1,200, Admiral, his sensor officer replied. But sir, the readings make no sense. Their power signatures are off every scale we have. Kreveth studied the display with growing dread. The human vessels were unlike anything in the Concorde database. They were sleek and angular, with hulls that seemed to absorb sensor beams rather than reflect them. The largest ship in their formation was nearly twice the size of his own flagship. They have been developing technology for 3,000 years, his first officer said quietly. While we grew comfortable and stopped innovating, they were building this. We have 300 ships, Kreveth replied. We have the finest crews in the Concorde. We will hold the line. He did not believe his own words. Neither did anyone else on the bridge. The human fleet began to move. They advanced in a formation that Kreveth did not recognize. His tactical computers tried to analyze their pattern, but returned only errors. They are using strategies we have never seen, his tactical officer reported. Our prediction algorithms cannot anticipate their movements. Then we fight the old way, by instinct and courage. Kreveth gave the order to what? Engage. His fleet surged forward, weapons charging. The first volleys of plasma fire streaked across the void toward the human vessels. And then something impossible happened. The human ships vanished. One moment they were there. The next they were gone. Where did they go? Kreveth shouted. Admiral, they are behind us. Kreveth spun around. The human fleet had appeared behind his formation without warning. They had not flown around his ships. They had simply appeared, slipspace micro jumps. His first officer breathed. They can enter and exit slipspace at will. Even in combat, the human weapons fired. Beams of energy that Kreveth could not identify struck his ships. They did not impact the shields. They passed through them as if they did not exist. Explosions blossomed across his fleet. Ships that had been intact moments ago became clouds of debris. Return fire, Kreveth screamed. His ships turned and fired everything they had. Plasma beams and missile swarms and kinetic projectiles. All streaked toward the human vessels. The humans did not even try to dodge. Their shields absorbed every shot without flickering. Impossible, the tactical officer whispered. No shield technology should be able to absorb that much damage. They have had 3,000 years to develop their shields, Kreveth replied. 3,000 years while we told ourselves they were dead. The battle lasted 11 hours, but it was decided in the first 15 minutes. Kreveth watched his fleet die. Around him, ship after ship fell to weapons that bypassed shields and armor alike. Crews that had trained for decades were wiped out by technology they could not comprehend. When the slaughter finally ended, less than 40 Concorde vessels remained. Kreveth's flagship was among them, only because the humans had chosen not to destroy it. And Merrill, his communications officer, said, "We are receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Put it through." A face appeared on his view screen. It was a human female with dark skin and gray eyes. She wore a uniform that bore symbols Kreveth did not recognize. "I am Captain Alara Vance of the Terran Reclamation Fleet," she said. "Your fleet is defeated. You may withdraw with your surviving ships, or you may continue fighting and die. The choice is yours." Kreveth stared at her. "You would let us go, after what we did to your people." "What your ancestors did," Alara corrected. "We do not hold children responsible for the sins of their Parents, withdraw, Admiral. Go back to the Concorde and tell them what you saw here today. Tell them that humanity has returned. And tell them that we are not what they tried to make us. What do you mean? They tried to turn us into monsters. By treating us as monsters, they failed. We are better than that. We will not become what destroyed us. The transmission ended. Krevith sat in silence for a long moment. Then he gave the order to withdraw. His surviving ships limped away from the Sol system behind them. The human fleet moved toward Earth. Alara watched the Concorde vessels flee and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The battle was over. They had won. But the war was not about killing. It had never been about killing. Take us to Earth, she ordered. Standard orbit. The Prometheus descended toward the blue planet. Through the viewports, Alara could see continents and oceans that she had only ever seen in ancient recordings. 3,000 years of recovery had healed many of the scars. Forests covered the old blast zones. Cities lay in ruins beneath the new growth. But life had returned. Earth had survived. Just like humanity. The first dropships launched from the fleet. Soldiers and civilians descended toward a world that none of them had ever walked upon. But all of them had dreamed of. Admiral Chun stood beside Alara as they watched the landing. Tears streamed down his ancient face. We made it, he whispered. After all these years, we finally made it. Home. Alara put her hand on his shoulder. This is just the beginning. Admiral, we have reclaimed Earth, but there are still hundreds of worlds under Concorde control. Hundreds of species that are still enslaved. I know, but let us have this moment, Captain. Let us celebrate what our ancestors dreamed of. Tomorrow we can plan the liberation of the galaxy. Today we are home. Alara nodded. He was right. They had earned this moment. Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly beneath them. Blue and green and beautiful home at last. Ambassador Valeth requested asylum 3 days after the Battle of Sol. She was not alone. Dozens of Sethrani officials and military officers fled Concorde space and sought protection among the very species they had once tried to destroy. They came with information. They came with secrets. They came with the truth. Alara met with Valeth aboard the Prometheus in a conference room that overlooked Earth. The Sethrani ambassador looked smaller than she had in her official portraits. Her scales had lost their luster. Her eyes were filled with shame. I did not know, Valeth said quietly. I believed the lies we were told. I thought your people had destroyed themselves. I never imagined that the Concorde, would you have done anything differently if you had known? Alara asked. Valeth was silent for a long moment. I do not know, and that is what terrifies me. I might have simply accepted it as the price of order. I might have told myself that it was necessary. That is what your leaders told themselves 3,000 years ago. That genocide was necessary. That extermination was mercy. Yes. Alara leaned back in her chair and studied the ambassador. Why are you here, Valeth? What do you want from us? I want to help you destroy the Concorde. We do not want to destroy it. We want to change it. Valeth looked confused. I do not understand. After what was done to your people, after the murder of billions, you do not want revenge. Oh, we want revenge, Alara admitted. Every human alive wants to make the Concorde pay for what it did. But revenge would make us just like them. We would become the monsters they tried to make us. She stood and walked to the viewport. Earth hung below them, blue and beautiful and alive. Our ancestors made a choice when they fled. They could have become bitter and hateful. They could have raised their children to hate the Concorde and dream only of vengeance. Some did. But the woman who led you, Sarah Chem, believed that we could be better. Better how? Better than the species that tried to kill us. Better than the instinct for cruelty that seems to exist in every intelligent race. She believed that humanity could build something new, a society based on freedom and equality, a place where no species would ever be enslaved or exterminated again. Elara turned to face Vailith. That is what we have spent 3,000 years building. Not just ships and weapons, but a new way of living, a new kind of civilization. And you believe this new civilization can replace the Concord? I know it can, because we are not trying to conquer anyone. We are trying to liberate everyone. 3 weeks later, the Prometheus broadcast a message across every Concord frequency. The message contained files from the Concord's own archives, files that revealed the truth about what had been done to humanity, files that showed 47 other species had been subjected to similar treatment. 18 of those species were officially extinct, erased from existence because they had challenged Concord authority. The others existed in carefully controlled populations, their technology limited, their histories rewritten, their very identities stolen from them. The message spread like fire across the galaxy. Species that had been told they were alone in their suffering discovered they were part of a pattern of oppression that stretched back tens of thousands of years. And they discovered that the pattern could be broken. Rebellions erupted on 100 worlds within weeks. The Vreen threw off their Sethrani governors and declared independence. The Morvic collective fractured as subjugated species within. Their territory demanded freedom. The crystalline hegemony faced uprisings from the organic beings they had used as labor for millennia. And through it, all humanity did not conquer. They did not invade. They simply provided support. Ships arrived, carrying weapons and supplies for rebel forces. Engineers helped liberated worlds build their own defenses. Teachers shared knowledge that the Concord had kept secret for ages. One by one, the pillars of the old order crumbled 1 year after humanity's return. The Galactic Concord formally dissolved. High Chancellor Morinth signed the dissolution order in a ceremony broadcast across known space. He looked broken. He looked old. He looked like someone who had finally been forced to face the consequences of his civilization's crimes. In the Concord's place rose something new. The Free Systems Alliance, a true federation built on principles that humanity had carried with them through 3,000 years of exile. Every species had a voice. Every world had rights. No one would ever be enslaved or exterminated again. The Alliance's founding document was signed on Earth. In the ruins of what had once been New York City, representatives from over 100 species gathered to witness the moment. Admiral Chum was there. He was the last living human who had known elders who had actually fled Earth as children. He was old and frail, but his eyes still burned with purpose. When the document was signed, he rose to speak. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors were driven from this world. They fled into the unknown with nothing but their lives and their hope. Many wanted to give up. Many wanted to die, but they chose to survive. His voice grew stronger as he continued. They survived because they believed that one day their children would return. They believed that humanity had something to offer the galaxy. Not conquest, not domination, but freedom, justice. The simple idea that every thinking being deserves dignity and respect. He looked out at the assembled representatives, human and Sethrani and Velthari and Druin and dozens of other species, all standing together. Today we honor their belief. Today we prove that they were right. The Concord tried to destroy us because they feared what we represented. They were right to fear, not because we would defeat them in battle, but because we would show the galaxy that there was another way. Admiral Chine smiled. We survived. We remembered. We returned, and we made sure that no one would ever have to run again. He died peacefully 6 months later, surrounded by family and friends, finally able to rest. His final words became the motto of the Free Systems Alliance. They were inscribed on the memorial built where the first human cities had once stood, and they were taught to every child of every species in the new civilization that humanity had helped create. We survived, we remembered, we returned, and we made sure no one would ever have to run again. The stars still shone in the darkness. But now they shone on a galaxy transformed. A galaxy where the word forbidden had been erased from every map. A galaxy where humanity had finally come home not as conquerors, but as liberators, and the universe would never be the same. The end.